This is one of the few opportunities that we actually have when all of the graduate school kind of comes together. And so with that, if you will entertain me anyway in saying welcome to everybody, and at the same time, your sort of foray in the Architectural Association begins. As far as I'm concerned, today is a shift for many of you from passive observers to really active participants in this place. And what I want to do, my name is Theodore Spyropoulos. I direct the DRL with a lot of really good people, a lot of good students that come from everywhere to come and participate. Is share a little bit about the motivation, some ideas about the kind of general statement of purpose, and also a kind of declaration from my side, which I should just basically say it from the beginning. I have an unapologetic approach to believe that design is a really instrumental and important thing in this world. We very much believe in experimentation and in terms of openness about trying to construct new ways of exploring how architecture can participate today. For me, I say it's unapologetic because I believe anyone who wants to sort of play with words or sort of have a different attitude about things is really not in a belief that architecture really matters, and somehow that it allows itself in all of the different ways, and particularly in the graduate school, where we have very different and specialized courses, to kind of come together and to really start to speculate about defining our present as much as our future. The slide is a book that was titled A Continuing Experiment. It was done by James Gowan in this place as a way to sort of synthesize different kind of characters. We have a host of them here, some very well known, some others maybe not well known at all. But we're not living in a form of nostalgia. Our project is a project of today. Yours is beginning as you start to settle into the different kinds of communities that you're going to operate. But for me, it's also a reminder to understand what it means to come together. And because you guys are here all in the same room, it's also my responsibility to tell you that regardless of which camp that you're in, you're part of one community here, not just from the graduate school and in between programs, but the larger kind of network of people that are coming through here and are trying to share not only their experiences, but are trying to progress and innovate the practice of architecture. And this is a slide in rooms that you will populate of people like Cedric Price and Gordon Pask and John Fraser, all people that were coming together here, having conversations and exploring ideas. Specifically to the DRL, we believe in design, we explore new tools, we explore ideas of computation, but to think that there is a novelty in this, it really isn't. We're pretty much long in the tooth, 15 years going after this kind of, let's say, ideas of exploring tools and ideas about projects and fostering a kind of attitude towards design research. But the history is from the 50s till now. People like Negroponte exploring things like the Architecture Machine Group. Those experiments for over a 10-year period actually formalize themselves in things like the Media Lab. The project of architecture is not always buildings. Communication for me and for the people that work with me and for the students that I think kind of share some of the synergies of these things is really the enabling agency through things. Architecture becomes a language that we share. Design is a mode of inquiry. It's an intellectual project as much as it is a proposition. When we sort of construct experiments, it's not for the sake of experimentation. If we look at things like Charles and Ray Eames, setting up the experiment in itself is just as much about speculating about the future. This is Power of 10, a very famous film where the Eames were trying to talk about the most micro to the most macro, and their tools was a camera and a crane. When we look at other people that have been very influential to the DRL, people like Otto are for sure rock stars in their own right. The idea of material computation, the idea of observing is not just about constructing a way to communicate, it's constructing a form of understanding. And for us, the business of actually trying to understand and to ask better questions about how we participate in this larger kind of research construct is very much fundamental. This is Otto setting up an experiment with a series of matrix-like cameras to try to understand the erection process of a lot of these kind of minimal tension structures. When we explore some of the things that we do, we realize that architecture in the most conventional sense is not enough to try to allow, let's say, the past to inform our future. People like Claude Shannon, who's very famous for defining information theory in our contemporary age, also set up experiments like these mechanical mice that were problem solving, how mechanical mice could actually embed themselves with memory and allow the analog world to participate in very lifelike forms. I also want to share that there isn't this kind of idea of one shared manifesto. Manifestos are really obsolete as far as I'm concerned. Maybe other people will tell you otherwise, but I'm not interested, and my community of people are not interested to make the world singular and finite. It's not about style, it's about sensibility, and it's about exploring ideas wherever they come. Some will come from more machinic and computational platforms. Some will be in terms of revisiting the things around us, like nature, not in some kind of nostalgic green lawn, urban English garden setting. But this is about actually understanding how things actually correlate and relate into the world. We believe in ecologies, as much about humans and machines and machines and machines, but fostering kind of new kind of thoughts about how we can participate, how machines and our architecture can enable things, how we can foster curiosity and also try to challenge the kind of habitual responses that I think are very much part of our discipline and discourse today. There was a time, a long, long time ago, and it's not without any nostalgia. I'm not a hippie guy. I do like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but really because of synergies and experiments that were really trying to be brought to the everyday. Your project is really to do what you're doing here and communicate it to the world out there, and it's as simple as actually doing it across the street. This is the Osaka Expo. This brought together people like the Metabolists and a whole series of other people together to sort of speculate through their designs what was actually happening in the world. A big thing about actually creating work and opening it up into the world is what communities sort of gravitate towards that. And for example, this image at the opening of the Osaka Expo has people like Dennis Crompton from Archigram, has people like Moshe Safdie, Yona Friedman, and a series of other characters that all were coming together. That coming together, I think, is really important, and I think it's one of the fundamental features of what makes the AA the AA. We don't have a lot of resources, but we do have a conviction towards design, and I believe that this is very important. One thing that you may want to know, because you're the youth, and we're going to talk about tomorrow, Moshe Safdie, which we had a chance to visit right before I gave this talk now today, his most famous project is a project that he did as a thesis student. Habitat for Humanity, a project that he was basically enabled to set up his office at 24 years old, still remains today his passion and his exploration. And you can see that in some of the recent work. So when we talk about community, I really don't say that community relies on DRL or any of these other kind of superficial distinctions, but really about like-minded people that are coming together with a purpose. That purpose in these rooms are communicated through projects. And I say that because I think projects matter, design matters, and what's great about it is it doesn't need you to actually tell the story. There are conversations between different ages, there are conversations between projects and synergies and conflicts that really are part of the creative fiction of what I think this place is really about. In the DRL, maybe somehow slightly different, it's not a choice. We believe in collective design, we are self-organized, so as much as there is a theory, the methodology and practices that people work together to develop and to explore these ideas, the international community that fosters this and brings you here is enabled within a framework to allow that to become a design problem. How we teach in the DRL is also by understanding that we all have accountability. Students are very much a part of not only driving the research and the trajectory of the course, but also instructing other students. And I think that's really important. So for me anyway, and for my communication, I guess generally to discuss with the graduate school, is that the role of design today is very much collective. It's really about fostering shared pursuits. It is one of action and awareness. We don't always have answers. Architecture is not always the answer. And you have to be also have the conviction to be able to understand the difference. We work with a lot of computational tools, and there's this kind of idea that we work with these things to have kind of explicit control over things. We work with these tools to have a better understanding about these things. Control is an illusion, and anyone who tells you otherwise really doesn't understand what they're doing. Experimentation and research is not about doing research for the sake of it, or for you guys to get jobs at universities. It's really about trying to foster a way of prototyping the future, of building a new knowledge to support practice, to push practice, and to enable, I think, a much higher level of debate, discourse about really what the role of architecture is and the role of architects within that discourse. We had some videos, but we don't now. In terms of a lot of the research that we're working on, making for me is fundamental in design. It's not about making a model or just illustrating an idea. It's about shifting from representational ideas to fostering more prototypical ways of thinking, fostering ways of demonstrating with some approach to design a way of having a bigger purpose than what you have in front of you. Enabling that with scenario, with feedback, with developing kind of more cross-disciplinary experiments, that is a very big part of what we do. And when we have the opportunity, we try to open that up to the community within the DRL, which over 15 years now is a lot of people. We had a 10th year anniversary to try to situate what all of this stuff is meaning in the world today. This was an exhibition that happened 6 years ago. And with that, we wanted to create a project, a design build of 2 of our graduates who have gone on to have pretty successful practice in their own right, but really a design build project facilitated by the DRL, the students of the DRL, built by the students of the DRL, moving 50 tons worth of concrete as a side project, really because we believed that it was important to do something and to make something with techniques that at the end of the day we assume are quite easy to handle, but working with our engineers, Adam Kara-Taylor, people like Albert Taylor, who's a very important person in this course, and Ed Mosley, Hanif Kara at the time, demonstrating, even if it is just in a pavilion setting, what it means to create a place. The architecture machine is something that Negroponte was sort of speculating about, how these new tools facilitate a way of sort of operating in the world. And in his generation, in the late 60s, it was almost a kind of anti-architect model. The computers and the machines will do the work for us. And like a lot of the visionary sort of ideas of projects, that would enable a very different kind of societal relationship between things. At that time, computers were like that. Today they may be a little bit smaller. They still offer us the same window into the world, which is they are mediums. Nothing more, nothing less. But I think it's very important to understand where I go back to this idea of this project. McLuhan was a very interesting character during the same process of all of these visionary projects, archograms, Negropontes, and he basically had a certain attitude about the future, and he basically says, if you're interested in the future, look to the present, because we generally live in the past. The DRL is an architecture and urbanism course. As much as we're interested in robotics and material experiments, we're also interested in the practice of the city, exploring notions of the urban, developing constructs of the prototype. The first 6 to 7, 8 years, we were fundamentally looking at London. We returned back to this kind of thing about rethinking London. This is a speculation done by TfL. 2026, this is London for you. We have Ferris wheels, not one, but many. We get more horizontal kind of Londonized. This is the vision, supposedly, of what our future and your future that you're going to enable is. If it's not that, then it's usually this, which basically says, come here, have a good time, and then go into the world and forget everything you learned. For me, it's really important to understand in a lot of those projects in the 60s and 70s, it wasn't ideas that left people back. It was enabling and embracing technologies that were yet to come, and to be able to facilitate in this kind of accelerated, uncertain, latent, and unknown present, how we can sort of participate and enable these kind of projects. The visions of the city, I think, have always been quite progressive. They've been downgraded to basically saying that we occupy the street and that's about it. This is 1913. This is a vision from Scientific America that was on the cover. The city was a three-dimensional interface, flying vehicles, bridges connecting buildings, shared models. There was, and there still is, let's call it a modern project, but not in the ways that we sort of are dominated within discourse today. When we revisit, let's say, some of those modern masters and we look at people like Frank Lloyd Wright, when you see a project like Broadacre City, I'd like to call your attention to these flying little helicopters and crazy little cars that he also designed. Enabling the future of the city means that you also not only think about its buildings, you think about its infrastructure, you think about its vehicles, you think of it as an ecology of machines and people and what that actually really means. We believe in models, and our agenda today, which has evolved over 4 discourses, let's say, because we frame questions over 3 to 4 year periods, is really about exploring the notion of behavior. Behavioral complexity, what we've titled this agenda, is really trying to explore fundamental questions of scenario, of time, enabling a very intimate conversation with materials and forms of production, if those are coming from synthetic biology, or they're coming from swarm printing and robotics, or they're coming at basically revisiting projects like Kenzo Tange's Metabolist project for the city of Tokyo, or looking at the work of Buckminster Fuller. They're all part of a motivated question that tries to explore architecture and infrastructure as a user interface. If we look at what that actually means fundamentally today, we start to have to problematize what we really mean by architecture today. It's a word that fundamentally describes a lot of things in the world today, and building is only one of it. This is a mapping of how a vision system for your self-cleaning little Roomba that comes out of the sofa and cleans your apartment when you decide to leave works. These are 2 different companies creating vision systems and fitness criteria for their sort of environmental response, where machines and objects are very much a part of reorganizing and constructing. Organization plays a fundamental role in the way that we work. We work polyscalely. We work at different scales at the same time, trying to actually see how things are. Vision systems are not necessarily just about cameras, it's about objects, it's about information, it's about ways of distributing a kind of invisible infrastructure that dominates our contemporary society. This is Project Tango, which basically says every one of your phones is going to be a 3-dimensional scanner. As you walk, your environments will dynamically be mapped. At the same time, we have self-driven cars, ideas of autonomous systems that will be deployed as operable machines that are going to actively engage with our very near future. If we think that that's just a problem of the city, and maybe some cities like London or San Jose, which are being piloted for these kind of things, you can also understand that this is the way that we're seeing larger migrations. So for example, Rolls-Royce developing ships that are basically going to be challenged with the idea of actually developing a whole series of water-based infrastructures that are going to communicate in a very autonomous way. Beyond marketing, which was like the release of Amazon's kind of ideas of using drones to deliver your packages in 30 minutes, you'll realize they weren't the only company. As very recently, Google also talked about the fact that they've been piloting this project for 3 years now. Every architecture office, the DRL included, are working on exploring ideas of drones. It's not a project that's really relegated with discipline in mind. And so it's very important, I think, for us to really problematize what it is that we're actually doing. And part of that is to also not be so afraid of technology. We're not talking about technology literally of today. Technology is a very human pursuit. It's a way of thinking and a way of sort of acting in the world. So for us, it's very important not only to shift from representational forms to prototypical ones, but to really shift from the prototypical into really demonstrations, ways that we can actually put things in the world and allow people to participate in terms of enabling not only content, giving context, and also exploring potentials of how these larger research projects actually are very much a part of a much bigger project. We'll call it architecture, they'll call it something else, but I think fundamentally it's about a shared and very collective way of thinking about how design really enables a fundamental difference in the way that we communicate in the everyday, in the way that we operate within the city, and in the way that we choose to live. So a lot of the problems that we're exploring today are very much a part of that. To give you a little bit of a window of some of the research that's going on, if you don't mind me opening up a couple of videos. So for example, two of our studios, I could show you maybe 5 minutes of each. We'll start with Rob Stewart-Smith, who is also a former student of the DRL, who went out into practice, worked for people like Nicholas Grimshaw. He's worked for Cecil Balmond, he's worked for a lot of people. Actively, both practitioner, student, and teacher, very much a part of the way that I see a lot of the people in the community within the DRL. As much as we're trying to explore these ideas, we're heavily invested in what they mean in terms of practice and what we mean in terms of design. These are some of the speculations of phase 1 and phase 2 currently, which you will be joining that conversation very quickly, exploring different ideas of life cycle in materials, different problems of actually developing airborne infrastructures, printing systems. We try to set up the experiment as an experiment. There are multiple parallel kind of researches that are happening simultaneously. They're very much a part of actually trying to inquire how we can use tools to basically give us a better understanding. I keep using the word understanding because design research is fundamentally a project of failure. And the sooner that you sort of create this context where failure is a very instrumental part of your own education, then you really open yourself up, I think, to discover and potentially innovate with not only the projects that you can sort of develop, but really the communities of people that you can discuss with and explore some of these ideas in practice. We have students working all over the world, some of them in practices, some of them in universities and in research institutes, some of them on their own kind of art and design initiatives. It's varied. We like to celebrate diversity in that. And I think it's very much a product of just having a certain attitude towards design, which is really about enabling a kind of proactive future. If Rob is sort of explaining a certain kind of attitude of materiality, flat sheets, patterning, this kind of things, Sajay is exploring a larger kind of construct of looking at how robotics and architecture can be facilitated. He is very much interested and has a very strong history developing different forms of material computation, digital analog feedback systems. He's one of the heads of code design at Zaha Hadid Architects. He's also a former student of the DRL. His recent research is really about looking at deployable structures, really about sort of exploring different ideas of robotic fabrication, enabling questions about materiality and phase change, and really trying to see how those production values that were very much a part of that industrial revolution that gave us those arms in the first place, and the infrastructure of the urban based on streets and cars, if part of that information communication revolution can be embedded within these machines today, and somehow we could be exploring how some of these things could actually participate in some of these larger questions about how we facilitate a more contemporary role of production. I'll let this play for a couple more minutes, but I think one of the things that is quite important is that we foster a lot of relationships with outside, not only consultants, but like-minded people. A big part of the way that we work is really to also engage knowledge wherever it may be. If that is working with RoboFold like Sajay is doing to give us very direct access to a practice that's basically developing new fabrication techniques for folding metal, that kind of active engagement with these projects are really important. We don't pretend that we know everything. Actually, we are very actively seeking to collaborate and to work with people. Those issues, working with machines like that, you can look at things that Patrick Schumacher is doing and Pierre Andrea, working with companies like Ferrari to challenge and rethink ideas of developing systems, of structuring surfaces, materiality, and so forth. And myself, working with Mustafa El Said, are exploring kinds of ideas of self-aware, self-assembled systems today. With that, I think our time is up. And for our students, we'll be meeting tomorrow in the studio because you guys have a drinks party which we'll all participate in. But we'll meet in the studio, which is the third floor of Morwell Street, 16 Morwell, at 10 o'clock, where we'll go over the standard protocol of seminars, workshops, and all of that stuff. You'll get a PDF, basically, of a course guide that will outline your next 16 months worth of life, so don't worry. Anxiety and all of that stuff will be sorted out tomorrow. And anyway, welcome. I think you should really take this opportunity to really get to know each other, and we hope you have a good time here. Thanks.